You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate, on Desert Rock FM.
Well, welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show. We've got a Christmas special for you. It's not Paul Kelly. That one you may have already heard, How to Make Gravy. That was a Christmas special, but we thought we'd follow that up with, of course, today's guest, who is bringing a Christmas cheer into the studio today. Of course, you're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, editor of the Betoota Advocate, and Errol Parker, editor-at-large. How are you, Errol?
Good, mate. Just looking forward to learning how to make gravy in other ways. You know, obviously the state politics down south in New South Wales, it's been very lucrative for a lot of people down there.
Yeah, very much so. So much so that the New South Wales ICAC is really... it's proving itself as a worthy institution. Yeah, it's in vogue and certainly busy. And today's guest, I guess, is someone who...
Is aware that it exists.
Is aware it exists and is not tarnished by it, which is surprising for a state politician. Haven't been tagged with the ICAC. Today we are joined by the New South Wales Opposition Leader, Chris Minns. Thank you for joining us, mate.
Thanks, Clancy. Nice to see you, Errol. How are you, boys?
Good, mate.
Good, mate. Now, we opened up, pretty hot, I would say, speaking about ICAC, but obviously ICAC's playing a big role in your life right now because your former opponent has just gone down to an investigation. Nothing's been proven.
Hasn't gone down yet. She's just merely had the microscope placed on her, and albeit briefly. She's
made it clear that she doesn't believe she should be, the Premier while an investigation is taking place into alleged misconduct. So she's been replaced by another bloke who is about your age and, seems to have the same stamina as you and makes for, I guess, an exciting opponent for the Labor Party in the shape of Dominic Perrottet. What is your relationship like with colleagues, like Perrottet?
It's actually pretty good, yeah. No, we get on very well.
Yeah.
We've had, gone out for a few beers and I don't think I got a Christmas card from him, but people don't send Christmas cards anymore.
No.
But no, I get on with him, yeah. On a personal level, I like him. I don't know if he'd say the same thing.
Probably not, no. Who do you think could run the fastest 5K between you two? I mean, you both look like you're pretty fit.
5K.
You don't really look like the traditional politician, it's probably... We've
5K.
come a long way.
To be honest, I reckon he would because I've seen him run, and he's
got more things to run from.
Yeah. He's sort of tall, like he's a big unit. Has he been on the podcast yet?
No. I should have actually prefaced this interview with that. Dominic Perrottet the invitation is open to join us. Every time a politician comes on here, regardless of what side of politics they're from, we get accused of promoting them or being in their pocket.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. The last politician we did have, we mentioned outside, was the opposition leader of Queensland, LNP leader David Crisafulli.
And what's he like?
Yeah, he was. He's an interesting guy, but he's in a similar position to you. There's just been so much, I guess, news and noise around the Premier. Chris Minns isn't cutting through. Neither is Crisafulli, and we can't say that's a left or right thing either.
Well, we're trying, but mate, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth stories about Omicron or COVID
or a ferry that's got some cracks in it.
Ferries. So
Spanish tram flu.
So trying to get on the news is tough, but we're doing our bit. We're trying, and we're in an arm wrestle now with Perrottet. He'd probably win the 5K run. He's quick. I've seen him running. I've seen him in his running gear, actually.
Yeah, I reckon you probably have him in the goanna pool, though.
Yeah, right. He's all legs and arms. He's quick,
Yeah, no core.
Now, one thing I want to ask you is in similar to how we grilled and skewered Crisafulli, and before that, your close mate in the shape of Giovanni Barilaro.
Oh, yeah.
You are a politician. You are the leader of the Labor Party. You have the potential to take government in New South Wales, to clean up the shop after, what has been a disastrous couple of years in the shape of a pandemic. A lot of people out of work. Wages are low. Cost of living's fucked.
No one can buy a house.
The Premier's bloody, gone missing, replaced overnight in the middle of a pandemic recovery. But the people of New South Wales have you as the alternative. What do you know about the world?
Well, I mean, I think it has been tough over the last couple of years. My electorate's in southern Sydney, and it was part of those locked down local government areas. So we had the curfew and worker restrictions and worker permits. And ever since that's finished, you've got a situation where, particularly in Sydney, I don't know what it's like in other parts, like in Brisbane, but Sydney and in the regions as well in New South Wales, petrol's gone up 25%, rents have gone up 7.5%, fresh food, fruit and veggies have gone up 7%, and wages are flat, and they've been flat for probably a couple of decades, but certainly now it's really starting to bite. So, for many people, particularly young people, it's pretty impossible to get ahead. And I was talking to, notwithstanding that we're friendly, the Premier's solution to a lot of this is to say, we need to jack up the GST and apply it to fresh food, make it broader. Look, I just feel like that kind of pushing the costs of government and the cost of living onto people who can least afford to pay it, particularly after the last couple of years, is just not the way to go. Well,
just on that, Chris, if it's not, the pandemic, if it's not, broken pieces of infrastructure that's cutting through in the media, it's housing affordability in Sydney.
Yep.
How much of this issue is on the shoulders of, say, a federal government as opposed to a state government? Whose fault is it that this has really gone off the deep end down? Yeah, well, I mean, it's you raise the point. It's important that you raise it. There's house prices in Sydney have gone up 25% in 1 year, and there's been no inbound immigration into Australia for 2 years. So this is a huge, asset-driven change in what people can afford, and many people can't afford it at all. I think the average house price in Sydney is over $1 million now. In Brisbane, it's about 650,000 or something. Yeah, Queensland teachers get paid more than Sydney teachers. So first thing we need to do is make sure we get some wage growth, like serious wage growth, particularly people who PAYE taxpayers. They're falling further and further behind. Their salary just doesn't stretch as far, and you're seeing a lot of industrial action right across not just Sydney and New South, but the entire world. And I reckon that's not being driven by trade union leaders going, let's go out on strike. I think it's their membership going, we can't afford to live and work here anymore. It's just too expensive. So that's part of it. Supply is a big part of housing. You've got to have a situation where most of the housing supply in New South Wales, or in Sydney in particular, is in the northwest and southwest, what they call the growth corridor. Yeah. But mate, that's an hour and a half from the city CBD. And to get to and from work, you got to use toll roads, which are extremely expensive. There's not public transport links. So something's going wrong here. And I just feel like top to bottom, there's not an understanding of what the economy is doing to young people in particular.
Now, I've seen you've thrown around the possibility of abolishing tolls on the roads. I'm sure that gets a lot of people hot and heavy. That gets people excited. Would you ever consider rent control?
Rent control, so...
like they do in other major cities that actually, like Sydney, like Brisbane, like Melbourne, rely on people, whether they be middle class, working class citizens, to be in the CBD, be within a commute of the CBD. Yeah. That's obviously, there's no tenant rights across Australia at all. Australia's kind of the land, where God forgot the tenant, particularly renters. We can talk about housing affordability, but also the rental market is crushing people as well. Yeah. How do you approach this issue? Because we are living in a boomer supremacy where, as you mentioned before, once upon a time, we also had foreign investment in the Australian property market. We haven't even had that for 2 years, and that house prices have gone up. So that's just saying that there's people that would usually be spending money on luxuries are now just getting back into the property market because they're bored during lockdown, scrolling Domain. How do you tackle this God-given right for property investors to be assured risk-free investments?
Well, I mean, it's a big issue. Obviously, a big part of this is at the federal level with Commonwealth tax policy around negative gearing and changes to, the treatment of assets from the federal government. At the state level, we are looking at policies like key worker housing and more affordable and social housing. Victoria does it heaps better than New South Wales. And the multipliers are huge. So every dollar that you put into the housing market for affordable housing, you get something like $7 back in ancillary benefits. There's jobs in it, there's investment, the return for the government's huge. We've got really good non-government but not-for-profit providers that do an amazing job, like in my area, the St George Housing Association, just incredible. They do it at scale, they build beautiful looking buildings, it's all integrated, they're changing neighbourhoods around. So I think there's stuff we can do particularly the inner ring of Sydney, to change a lot of that. Key worker housing is important as well. So, like, I live...
Yeah, can you explain key worker housing? It's a term I've never heard before. It's not public housing. It's not...
No.
It's not housing commission.
Effectively, you would make sure that there was housing for those that work, for example, nurses in key big public hospitals. And you've got a situation like Royal North Shore, where cleaners and nurses live an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes from their work. And increasingly, because they've got options and labour's mobile, they can take jobs in, which is a good thing. That's what you want. But they're increasingly saying, well, do I really want to spend an hour and a half paying something like $5,000 a year in tolls for a job that I can get the same amount of money for in my local community? And the answer, more often than not, is no. Yeah. So key worker housing is something that other jurisdictions around the world do. We're looking at all those things to try and ease the burden because it's unprecedented. If you look at London, Paris, New York, all of them have social housing components in their big developments. New York's up to 20%. And you have to provide, if you're a developer, you've got to make sure that 20% of your housing stock is affordable housing.
Well, until that day comes, though, the Reserve Bank the other day said there is no way into the Sydney housing market if you don't have rich parents. What would your advice be to people who have poor parents who can't help them in?
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue, and we've touched on a whole bunch of stuff in relation to the economy and the family budget. We need to make sure wages get going and can keep pace with affordability across the board in Sydney. We need to make sure that we're not pushing all of the burden of taxation, particularly on younger people with these user pay taxes. In New South Wales, tolls, taxes, fines, fees, charges are all up. All of them are up. Taxes are growing at 3.2%. The economy's only growing at 2%. Majority of that or a big chunk of that is stamp duty, often paid by first home buyers. So we need to make sure, from the state perspective, we do everything we can. As I said, a lot of this rests in the Commonwealth jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Now, if I was a young person living in New South Wales, I'd actually, aside from what we've just spoken about now in terms of, you're carrying a lot of the government cost and you're locked out.
If you're young and you're on a good wicket, then you can afford to live somewhere nice.
Yeah, and it's all started with Joe Hockey saying the key to buying a house is getting a good job. We know that that's not enough. But, on top of all of these things, the intergenerational, wealth disparity and everything like that young people are kind of having to endure and not enjoy in your city. You've also got the aspect of a police state, really. Cities around the world, as we said, we've got rent control, we've got key worker housing. What they don't have in other cities around the world is lockout laws. They don't have police dogs walking through pubs on Christmas parties. The kids are not only, locked out financially, but they're the most legislated young people in the world. What are your thoughts on how to, make your city that you grew up in? And I'm sure you had a lot of fun in the Cross. I'm sure you had a lot of fun down in Darling Harbour during the Olympics.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Over the road at Oakey Jubes.
Yeah. How do you just cool off a little bit on this policing, kids getting strip searched at train stations, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So look, obviously it's an issue that it's a complicated issue. It has to do with not just the policing, but also the legislation that politicians like myself push through the parliament. It's not like police wake up one day and go, I think I'm going to do this today. They're obviously reacting to laws that have been passed by a series of governments. First of all, I thought the lockout laws in Sydney were terrible. And I broke with my party 2 years before they changed in 2020. I wrote an article in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2017 or 16 saying these are crazy. Sydney's losing its importance as a nighttime economy. We've got all these amazing bars and restaurants that aren't like the solid, normal, safe environments that we're just closing right across Sydney. And in the meantime, Newtown and the casino were a mess. So I thought it was just this massive distortion and spoke out against it at the time. And I was unhappy that the Labor Party didn't take that to the last election because I think we could have got a lot of support from young people, and it might have been enough in a few different seats to really push a lot of voters over to the Labor side. But look, good news that that's been changed. I'm concerned about a number of things in relation to the nighttime economy. I reckon it's really easy for innovative, young, entrepreneurial nightclub owners or pub or club managers to get their licence knocked over because, You've got a whole bunch of people, particularly in the inner city, who demand that the pub or the club cease trading at 10:30 at night or doesn't have loud music.
Yeah, so they can watch, I don't know, they can watch the BBC murder mysteries upstairs in their Art Deco apartment.
Yeah. And you see that, in the Cross and in the city, and it's not good. It robs the vitality of a city like Sydney, which has always had an element of excitement about it going back hundreds of years. It has always, I think it's important to say that this has been a perennial argument in Sydney in particular, because there has been that teetotaling element to the way licensed venues and nightlife has operated. A lot of people don't know this, but we had a referendum in New South Wales about abolishing prohibition for alcohol. Yeah. It was knocked over, but not by much. It was sort of, I think, a 60-40 result. And we've had teetotaling politicians that have been, responsible for a whole bunch of restrictions on, in particular, licensees for pubs and clubs for a long time. So it's a struggle, but I think we need to get the balance right. And, now's the time to do it, because you've got a situation where so many young people are being robbed of really important life chances and rites of passage to go out with their mates because they've had to stay home and live with mum and dad for on and off for 2 years and not go out on their own.
Yeah. And Sydney used to be a place where, you'd have the Whitlams or you'd have these bands and unless those kids are really living at home, they're going to London, they're going to Brisbane.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw that a lot during the lockout laws, because you had a lot of young restaurant owners and a lot of young publicans who left and moved to Los Angeles and London and New York. And I lived just outside of New York for a while. And every second person was Australian. They're opening a coffee shop in some corner. And they're doing quite well off the back of it. But you want that kind of creative energy and that sort of business acumen located in Australia, because I think that, when someone opens something, it does well. It creates 3 or 4 other opportunities and people think I'm going to go for it. And then all of a sudden your city's got a vibe and a dynamism that Sydney's been lacking for a while.
What is your story? I asked at the start of the interview, what do you know about the world? Can you tell us what it is that inspired you to, I guess, make the interesting career choice for a young man to spend your lifetime surrounded by teetotalers and wowsers and, fundamental Christians in Macquarie Street,
and
Sydney?
Yeah, well, we've got all many different people choose politics as a vocation. I joined the Labor Party when I was 17, and I've always liked it. I didn't come late to politics. I found it really exciting. I thought that for my generation, Paul Keating coming through and just ripping in on the nightly news was incredible. I never really heard anyone speak like that, let alone a Prime Minister. And then when you matched his the way he just ripped into the coalition and John Howard and John Hewson and all the rest of them with what was a really strong sense of where the country should go, I just thought it was the most exciting thing I'd ever seen. So I was pretty hooked from the beginning. Dropped in and out of politics, worked in it, and then left it for a while. Was living in the States, and the member for Cogra, who was a friend of mine, Cherie Burton, she said, look, I'm not running again. If you come back, you could put your hand up and run for pre-selection. And so I did that. And I haven't sort of enjoyed it every day, 24/7. It's oftentimes it's tough. And, you get a lot of challenges, but it's exciting. And even on horrible days, you never go to bed going, well, what a boring endeavour. You're not sort of putting the lids on toothpaste. It's exciting work.
And what does your team look like at the moment? You're sitting in opposition. What does the shadow government look like of New South Wales?
Is it important in the Labor Party to put a minister in the appropriate portfolio? Someone who at least has a tiny bit of experience about, say, what it is to be a teacher, what it is to be a policeman.
We got a bit of that. Obviously we got, I don't know, you guys would have heard of Jihad Dib, who was a fantastic principal in New South Wales for a long time, and he's on our front bench as the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy and Emergency Services.
Also the brother of, New South
Billy
Wales
Dib.
featherweight title holder, Billy Dib, Billy
Fantastic.
the Kid Dib.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. What did he have? The IBF or
IWB, I believe.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great asset for the Labor Party is someone like that, a community leader, punch bowl high principal, brother of a great boxer. I mean, they're not going to vote for him out there.
No, they love it. Yeah.
And
Billy's a top bloke too. But look, we don't have many people. In fact, I think we've got one from the previous Labor government. So we've been very, very unsuccessful politically. We haven't won an election in New South Wales since 2007. So we're not going to go to the next election going, we've got all the experience in the world of governing. We're going to say something else, which is we think that the state is on the wrong track. Half the transport infrastructure is falling over, isn't working properly, cost of living's through the roof. The government seems intent on pursuing a pretty right-wing economic agenda that I think shifts a whole bunch of the cost of living onto families, particularly those who live in Western Sydney.
Yeah.
So we don't have experience doing all those things. We want to radically change the joint.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've got Jihad Dib and you've got a kind of diverse party. But one thing that Gladys had over you last election was the success story of, the working class, daughter of immigrants who kind of not only was an icon to, the immigrant community and people of faith and also, female voters. This next election is going to look completely different to that, to Gladys versus Jody. You and Perrottet, you've got two young bulls. How are you going to appeal to those voters? I mean, Perrottet obviously has the people of faith. He's on a 7 and he's quite open about his religion.
He also has a tax policy too moving forward that's going to be very good to people who've bought houses in the past 5 years.
He's got the coveted property investor vote. How are you going to appeal to these different... Sydney's not... Sydney isn't just a grey city full of very similar people.
Yeah.
It's a diverse kind of place, and there's a lot of different wants and needs, particularly out west.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think less politics in politics. There's too much going on. We've approached COVID, I think, in a different way to the way oppositions around the country have approached it. I haven't thrown brickbats at Gladys Berejiklian or Dom Perrottet. I've tried to take a lot of politics out of this because I think it's a health emergency, not a political one. So really sticking to the issues. I'm not really interested in marching their ministers and their Premier demanding that they resign from office and kicking them out of the New South Wales Parliament building. We want to replace them. And as I said, if you look at a few things, firstly, the way Western Sydney's being treated, everybody that lives west of Parramatta has enormous commutes to and from work. They're paying enormous amounts of money to either pay rent or their mortgage. They've not got access to the hospitals and schools and public transport links that the other parts of Sydney have received. And in return, they get toll roads, which are extremely expensive. Some families are paying between $5,000 and $7,000 a year in tolls to get to and from work every single year, and it goes up at 4% each year, every year under the terms of the privatised contract. So there's a lot happening in New South Wales that I don't think people understand. So on a level as of today, what are the economic circumstances happening in New South Wales? We're going to offer an alternative to the government. Beyond that, my team and I don't have experience in government, but we do live and work in Sydney, and we are focused on, and New South Wales, and we are focused on what this state looks like 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
There's some really troubling numbers coming out of education, for example. So there's half as many apprentices in New South Wales today as there was when the government was elected in 2011. 150,000 fewer people going through vocational education in TAFE in New South Wales today. We're not investing in young people in terms of the skills of the future. And I think when you look at the challenges associated with the New South Wales economy, which is driven not primarily but in large measure by real estate and coal mining, you've got to start thinking about what a modern, diversified economy looks like. And are you skilling up young people so that they can take advantage of those entrepreneurial opportunities? And I think the answer at the moment is no. The reason for that is twofold. Firstly, the government's been in power for over 10 years, and I think you just start getting stale and, myopic, and you're worried about internal factional crap. And the second thing is, and this is reasonable, they've had their head down focused on COVID for the last 2 years. Now, I'm not knocking them for that. But that is an opportunity for the opposition to say, well, okay, we're thinking down the track. Mm-hmm. We're looking at where we want the state to be in 20 years' time. We think we need to start investing in these things so that we're prepared for major changes.
I mean, that is the strongest thing Perrottet has going for him right now, is that he is fighting for the freedoms of his citizens to return to the status quo. Yeah. So it's almost like, it's almost like if you weren't happy before the pandemic, you should be happy now because things are like what it were before the pandemic.
They were before,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, is that good enough? I mean, is that what a dynamic state looks like? Is that what an economy fit for the future looks like? Where will the jobs come from in the future? And like you mentioned it a few times, Errol, domestic manufacturing is an important part of this, like making sure we build things in New South Wales. Queensland does it well. They've invested in Maryborough, regional Queensland, 3,000 jobs in construction. They build trains up there. I mean, if Scott Morrison can come to the table and start saying, all of a sudden I care about climate change and we're going to have net zero by 2050, then our major coal trading partners will be going through the same epiphany over the coming 10 years. And that puts big pressure on the New South Wales economy because 90% of what we dig up out of the ground, we export. We don't use domestically.
That's an interesting that you mentioned Scott Morrison there, because one thing that was visible to everyone, even outside of New South Wales, over the last couple of years during the bushfires and during the pandemic, was how testy things got between the Berejiklian and Morrison governments.
Yeah.
Visibly, there's photos where Morrison's got his fists clenched while he's talking to Gladys and the emergency, the chief officer of the, Fitzsimmons was his name?
Yeah, Shane Fitzsimmons.
Yeah. How do you think you would manage, assuming you win the next election, Morrison also wins, how would you manage working alongside what appears to be a very difficult man to work with?
Yeah. He is like that, isn't he? Because it feels like...
if a Liberal state government can't work with him, I'm not sure how a Labor state government will.
Well, it's been raining a lot in eastern Australia now, which means in 2 to 3 years there's going to be another massive bushfire crisis. So that's when you could be, holding hands with the big fella. Trying to navigate our way through another, burning of Cobargo.
Yep. Well, I mean, that would be terrible, but not dealing with Scott Morrison, but bushfire in Cobargo. Look, I think that, I deal with him professionally. I'm not like, I don't think I'd be a dickhead about it. Like, you've got an obligation, if you're the Premier of New South Wales, to work with whomever the voters throw up. Like, who am I to say he shouldn't be Prime Minister? I know who I'm going to vote for when the election's in May, but if the other side get more votes, then... Our federation kind of works like that. You just got to put it to one side. But it's interesting. They do seem to all hate each other. And I think that's, in New South Wales, we haven't had a state or federal government from the Labor Party since 2013. And I don't think the joint's been fixed. And in many ways, it's declined substantially. And I think for a lot of people, they're further behind today than they were when all these guys got elected. So I think the answer isn't for these guys to keep fighting each other and for all of us to be following the ins and outs of their personal relationship with, which is obviously bad. My sense is try something new. Get behind new people and new ideas to get the state going.
Just quickly before you go, Chris, unfortunately for every New South Wales state government, they are also tasked with the job of governing regional New South Wales. And in the past, as we were saying over the past decade or so, that's been left up to the National Party and people of that cloth. Why should anyone in regional New South Wales vote for the Labor Party? I mean, could they do an even worse job than what the National Party has done now?
Look, I don't think so. I mean, the National Party, again, Liberal Party have been in power for that period of time. They've been in partnership with the National Party. They had a former leader who was bombastic and larger than life and a bit of a rogue every now and then. But
before he disappeared quietly into the night.
Before he just scrambled out of New South Wales in the middle of the night. No, I mean, it's a funny thing in regional New South Wales. I've been out there a fair bit. I'm a Sydney boy, so I'm not pretending that, I've got some special connection with the bush. I don't. But I met a bloke in Braidwood, not far from Queanbeyan, about an hour out of Queanbeyan.
Where they filmed the original Ned Kelly picture starring Mick Jagger.
Is that right? Yeah. It's a historical town.
It's where Canberra people get their second coffee on their way to Bateman's Bay.
Yeah, I know the coffee shop there. It's very good. Anyway, this fella was saying, lived there for 20 years, first 15 years just managing decline. Kids would get up, leave. The council was pretty slow. Everybody was just sort of like in a bit of a daze. The last 5 years, complete opposite. And I think it's been driven by baby boomers going, I don't need to live in Sydney anymore.
Tree change.
Tech being quick. and, computers meaning that you can talk with your boss and live anywhere, and then supercharged by COVID. So he said the last 5 years, it's the exact opposite. Can't find people to work in any of the shops, infrastructure not keeping pace with a growing population, and nowhere to live and not enough nurses and frontline workers. So he was sort of pitching it as this is the big opportunity for regional New South Wales. We've seen, rather than all of these towns looking, sad and worried about how many people are leaving every week, we're seeing the opposite. But it does require government to keep pace, make sure that when, for example, a young person opens a business, the planning approvals are done quickly, that they're not just sitting on someone's desk for weeks and weeks and weeks, so that, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, which I think is alive and well in New South Wales, doesn't get snuffed out by people believing, we do things slower here. Now, there's some towns that get it and are on fire. In fact, many of them. But I think the challenge for government is to make sure that we, kindle that fire and it keeps going.
Can you just quickly tell me the difference between Kogarah and where you're born and raised, and Cronulla? It is very close, and I feel like the people vote very differently across that bridge.
Yeah, well, it's a bridge. So it's Captain Cook Bridge and Tom Ugley's Bridge separate St. George from the Shire. Mm-hmm. My wife's from Cronulla. Mm-hmm. She grew up in Ewas Parade in Cronulla, and I grew up in Penshurst, which is in St. George, next door to where we live now, but separated by a million miles. I don't know. I mean, I just think it's sort of the way Sydney kind of grows up. You're right. It's not a homogenous joint. You can travel across a bridge and it can be vastly, vastly different between one community to the next. Vote different, have a different kind of demographic, have a different outlook on the world.
Dragons, Sharks.
Yeah.
Your Dragons?
No. What? I go for the Bulldogs.
Right.
Yeah. I've got the most marginal seat in the country. I'm the member for Kogarah, but I go for the Bulldogs because you can't change teams.
Okay.
It's against the rules.
Okay, they can across the bridge apparently.
Yeah, right. If you grew up in Coogee, you can change teams, but other than that, you can't do it.
Well, the Roosters did go through a bit of a rough patch for about 10 years, didn't they?
I wonder if he loses.
They were no longer cool, but in saying that, he did go from the Roosters into the Waratahs.
Did he?
Yeah.
Always been a Tars man.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he'll, if he loses, he'll just go back to Coogee, start going for the Roosters. Wouldn't that be? That'd be crazy.
I think
that'd be a bit of a ball.
If he loses, he's never ever going to force himself to watch a match of sport again.
Really?
I think he'll. I don't think he enjoys it.
Child actor, did you know that?
Yeah,
Child
and it
actor.
makes sense.
So
There's a bit of Roman Roy about him, don't you reckon?
Absolutely.
Bit of Kieran Culkin.
5:30 workouts here at 5:30.
Yeah. But, okay, well, that was an interesting chat. We're not even going to go into the Murdoch Royal Commission because we're running short on time. And we know that, we mentioned before, not much cut through for opposition leaders in the pandemic. And Sky are giving you a bit of love, so we won't make you throw them under the bus just yet. We'll throw that one to Albo when we speak to him next.
Yeah, when's Albo coming in?
Albo's come. He came in, but
Albo's been in a few times.
Things were very different when Albo came in. I think the pandemic hadn't really. I mean, they hadn't really found their talking points on either side of the aisle at that point. We were still in the JobKeeper Merry, that kind of political climate that we were in, where everyone was kind of happy, and we actually managed to end poverty. That was interesting.
And if Albo wants to talk to you, you leave your phones on the bench down at Marrickville Golf Club, and you walk the 17th with him and Toto. And
is that his dog's name?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I haven't. I've got to follow him on Instagram because he's got a big dog game on Instagram.
Does he?
Yeah. No.
I'm not familiar with that. That'll.
The other day, he went to a dog's birthday in Marrickville.
There you go.
And he put it on his Instagram. Yeah.
Well,
just like every other Australian does, don't they?
That's right.
Well, we'll finish this by re-extending that invitation to Perrottet. We've got to have both here.
Yeah.
And we would like to pair the two of you up. And I guess how long until the state of New South Wales pairs the two of you up?
Yeah, so we've got fixed elections. Okay. So it's March something. I can't remember that. March 2023.
Okay. All right. Well,
right around the corner.
Well, all the best over the next year.
Clancy.
And we'll be in touch.
Nice to see you, boys.
Thanks for coming on.